Welcome back to Talking Story. My name is John Minton, and I am probably more than is healthy for me thrilled to be joined by Victoria, Tecken, Tori. I'm such a huge fan of your channel,
Oh,
and
thank you.
now after you have given me the perfect spooky read this year
Oh,
with the best heart, like I thought it would be that way, and then it was just like it's like opening up at Christmas time, like that huge assortment of chocolates, and you think you picked the right one, but you really did get the caramel goodness.
yep.
And this was it was everything I was hoping for when I picked it up.
Awesome.
And I did not just want to ramble with a review. I wanted to talk to you, and I just so much appreciate you taking the time and coming on with me.
Well, I thank you for having me on. I love getting a chance to talk to other people in the community. This is my favorite part of what we do. So thank you so much for letting me come on your channel.
Oh, me too. This is the whole reason why I started it, and I just want to delve into your artist's journey and how this came to be. Now, from watching your channel, I know that you started writing very young.
I did.
Like, what would you say you first started?
I started writing poetry first, actually. I started
Really?
writing poetry when I was about 7 or 8.
Wow.
And just I always had an easier time expressing my emotions and my thoughts on paper than I did out of my mouth, which is still true.
Really?
Oh yeah, BookTube has helped me with that a lot.
I would think so. Yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah.
so interesting. So when you can actually think, because this is factoring into when I get down further in my quote, when you can think and
Yeah.
put those words just perfectly together, you're more comfortable with that.
Very much so. Yeah. And growing up, I was a very awkward kid. I was a nerd, as many of us were.
Same.
And so going through harder times in my childhood, I had to figure out, well, how do I express this? How do I understand and make sense of any of this? And for me, the easiest place to do that was always through that kind of safety barrier of fiction, where I started reading books from the library. I'd bring home like the 2 big grocery bags full of books from the library, and they were all about horses at that point, and read them all. I'm pretty sure I read every horse book at my library multiple times.
And this was 6 or 7, right around
This
6 or
was
7.
probably, I started moving into fiction like that more when I was probably about 9 or 10. I had a hard time learning how to read, actually. Um, and when I was about 9 was really when I started taking off with reading. And that was when I started, well, I loved horses and I was just learning how to read. And those two things kind of came together. And I ended up reading a lot more than was healthy horse content.
Were you learning to ride at the same time or just reading?
I was taking horse lessons. I think I started when I was about 9 or 10. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Awesome.
that was my life at that point.
I sat a horse quite a bit when I was young as well. So
Nice.
yeah,
Nice. It's a pretty amazing experience.
it really is. So was it free verse you were doing, or?
Yeah, definitely free verse. My husband, actually, it was funny when we first met in high school. He is a form and meter writer for poetry. And he told me at the beginning, he was like, that's real poetry. And I was like, I will change your mind.
I don't see the ABBA here. What's going on?
Yeah. So he's always been very supportive of my writing and loves my free verse now. So, but yeah, I haven't converted him necessarily, but
I was just going to say
he loves
converted
free
him.
verse now. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
good
He
for him.
writes rhyme and meter better than anybody I've ever seen. He's amazing. So
starting 6 or 7, free verse poetry, getting your emotions out there, moving on to fiction when you were around 9, 10, somewhere in there.
Yep.
When was it you decided? Do you remember your light bulb moment when you decided, I want to be a storyteller? Like, what was that lightning moment?
I think there's a couple answers to this. The first one actually goes back prior to me starting with poetry and fiction writing. I used to build these huge cities out of Duplos and Lincoln Logs and blocks and everything in my basement. I'm an only child, so I had many hours to entertain myself when I was a kid. And I would just build these massive cities, and there was the monarchy, and it was this whole big history. And I was just making these like massive stories out of my toys. And there were always these big wars, and the pirates would come in, and, it was very dramatic. And there was always then the queen would be kidnapped. And, it was very, I was writing in a way epic fantasy back even then.
Yeah.
And then I started reading all the horse books, and I got to a point where I started reading, and I was starting to get irritable about choices that were being made within the stories. Even at that age, I was like, well, but I wouldn't have done it that way. What if you wrote it this way instead? That would be so much better. At age 10, I knew what I was talking about.
Because you were already doing that in your cities.
Right. Yeah. And so I started writing my own horse book when I was about 12. I was like, you know what, I could write a horse chapter book. I'm going to tell a story about this. And I was homeschooled all the way through, and handed the book to my mom when I was done. And she was like, wow, this is really cool for being 12. You wrote a book. Let's, do a little self-print run. Self-publishing was a way different business back then.
Right, what an interesting way for you to dip your toes in that early.
Yeah, it was wild. It got really wild very quickly. We published it just as kind of a fun friends and family sort of thing when I was 14. And after that, it snowballed very quickly. I started getting people like, oh, you're a young author. Will you come and speak at our library? Will you come? I started doing motivational speaking when I was 14, 15.
Now, how did that sit with you, starting off being more comfortable on the page, and now you've got to do public speaking?
I was on the struggle bus for a while there. It took a lot, because public speaking, I had done, I'd done the church programs but that was like the extent of being up in front of people at that point. So the idea of going into a public school as a homeschooler and speaking in front of like a 5th grade class about writing a book was mildly terrifying, for sure.
How much foreign territory was that for you, just going into a public school? Like, it was beyond your experience.
Yeah, it was definitely weird. And, as a homeschooler, you always have this, like my kids are homeschooled too, and they watch the kids drive past on the school bus. And we have this kind of like romanticized idea of what school is like,
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was a little surreal, like walking into the building and getting to see what their kind of daily life was like. So that was cool. It was kind of like a field trip almost for me, I think.
See how the other side lives?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this is fascinating to me, because you're an only child, which I would have never in a million years guessed after reading this book, and so much insight and life you bring to the sister relationship.
Thank you.
And you were homeschooled, which I would have never in a million years have guessed, because you hit, and I was public school, and you hit the nail so much on the head with what happens in that institutional setting of school, when you're young.
Yeah.
So I find, wow, this is really, really fascinating to me. So do you think, go ahead. If you have
I was just going to say, once we get into phased, I can't take all the credit for the sister relationship in phased. And there's a reason for that I'll get into, but, as far as I've always been an observer, and I think I'm a very empathic person, and I love hearing other people's stories and just really trying to really put myself in the shoes of whoever story I'm listening to. I grew up with my grandfather telling me World War II and Civil War stories all the time. So like, I just grew up around really intense life stories, I guess.
Isn't that the beauty of story, though?
Yeah,
that allows
it's beautiful.
us to live other lives and walk in different shoes. And that's why I think it's so important right now that be more prevalent.
Absolutely. I think it's very easy to dehumanize something or someone you don't understand and immediately put a divide in between yourself and the other person.
Which is such an amazing theme of phased, which I will get to. So do you think, let me go in order here. Do you think you were more pulled to self-pub with something like phased because of that experience of your mom doing that with you when you were 14?
Yeah, I mean, self-pub was kind of a natural choice for me in the sense is that's what I knew, you know?
Right.
I had a lot of experience teaching. I taught at a lot of young writers conferences when I was in high school. I taught at an adult writers conference alongside like Gary Paulson, which was an incredible experience, who wrote Hatchet and Dog Song. He was such a cool guy. He took a break from like dog sledding in Alaska to come down and teach at this adult writers conference,
Wow.
which was just cool.
Yeah.
So I was around traditionally published authors and also some self-pub authors. So I kind of grew up just you just published and you just wrote your books, and there were pros and cons to each. And I think that's self-pub was just my comfort zone, honestly.
So you didn't even think about trad. I mean, that wasn't
Mm-mm.
even in the equation for you.
No, and I think there's so many pros to both sides, and I think that with traditional publishing, I had a hard time imagining letting go of that much of the control. That
Hmm.
might be an only child slash first child syndrome thing that I'm dealing with,
Right.
but it was genuinely my desire to, make or break my own career, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. It was like
Hmm.
I want to know that I'm on my own dime, that I'm, the one responsible for what happens with my career and my books. So I think traditional publishing is a great option for a lot of people, and it just was never something that I felt drawn to.
Right. And do you feel a bonus? Because I think one of the big bonuses of this is, and as I learned more about it, because, before I started this channel, I was completely ignorant,
Yeah.
really entirely ignorant. And my eyes have been so open. There's so much amazing material out there.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things that I find is that you get to be a boss, and that you can put your whole package together. You can talk
Yeah.
to the cover artists, you can talk to the print setters, everything you have a
Yeah.
hand in, as opposed to
Yeah.
just giving your art up.
Exactly. Yep. And I'm kind of a little bit of a leader director style personality anyway. So it was kind of a natural step for me to want to kind of manage my own process. Um, I definitely can see the appeal of having a team, because it's exhausting. There's a lot of hats you have to wear. But I think, too, the trad published authors, and I've been able to talk to so many of them now, they wear a lot of hats too, that I think a lot of people don't realize. I think they are responsible for a lot of their, social media image and all that kind of stuff now. So
You have to dance the same dance, don't you? I mean,
exactly. So in
you've
a
got
lot
to.
of ways, yeah.
Yeah, they leave it up to you to market and do so many. I was talking to some people, and it's like, yeah, they have to. A lot of writers will, once they get that agent and they get that contract, they hire their own publicist to push
Yeah.
their book, and it's like, is that what they're supposed to do?
Right.
I mean, it's not. It's
Yeah.
really not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so crazy. I had
Yeah.
no idea. Now, let me get into a little bit. Now, I find this fascinating how people work, right? So, are you the type of writer? And this has always struck me, because when my wife was going through some things, and she was going to archives of Cormac McCarthy, and
Mm,
she was like blown away, right? But it's like, this dude, like, it's a brain dump. Like, there's so much of it that just, it comes out whole. Like, he'll write it on a cocktail napkin or something, and it's pretty damn close to what ends up in the
yeah.
book. And then you'll listen to someone like Joe Abercrombie talk, and it's like it all happens in the rewriting. And so many writers are
Mhm.
like that. There's
Yeah.
so many drafts and there's so much rewriting. Where does Victoria Tecken fall? What is that writing style like for you? The actual craft of it.
There's
Is it a
so
brain dump, or
I there's so many there's so many pieces to that. I feel like I'm definitely more on the pantser slash gardener side of the planner pantser spectrum for writing. I tend to edit as I go. So when I have a full first draft, it's really the equivalent of like a third or fourth draft by the time I'm done with it. Because, like, for example, by the time anyone had ever seen Bloodstones, which is my new one coming out in November, the first chapter alone had been rewritten like 6 times before anybody else ever saw it.
so you
So
go like chapter by chapter, like
kind
you'll
of,
go back over.
Yeah. And as I write even paragraphs, I'll be like, nope, that's not worded right. I'll go back. Like I've tried the brain dump several times and it just stresses me out.
Really?
I have ADD, and one of the things that I struggle with is a lot of repetition. And
Hmm.
so to me, it's like, I don't want to have, like, I would rather do it as I go so that I'm not going back and back and back and back ad nauseum, because I'm just going to get stressed out and end up hating it.
Yeah.
So it helps me also in my developmental stages to have I have a close knit group of writers around me now that I can talk the story through. And that helps me a lot. Instead of like trying to write down a developmental draft, I'll stop and I'll be like, okay, guys, should I do this or this? And I'm kind of, here's some things that I'm thinking, weigh in with thoughts. And that process of talking through it actually is very, very helpful for me in the developmental side.
So is this kind of like your outline phase? Do you spend the
Mm-hmm.
time to do a full like character arc outline and everything,
Nope.
or no? You just talk through
Yep.
an idea board with these trusted
It's
group and then go from there.
Yeah, it's a very discovery writer style.
Hmm.
I'm a big believer in the fact that my characters are their own entities in a way, and that it's my job to kind of discover them and tell their story.
Hmm.
And if I'm having trouble with a certain character, it's because I don't know them well enough yet.
Yeah.
So,
And I've heard this so many times, and I'm not a writer, but I love it. And I've heard this so many times is you want to give the space for your characters to surprise you.
yes,
Like I
absolutely.
didn't see that coming, but
Yes.
that's awesome.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is so fulfilling when that happens, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and it is also, in my opinion, just from my own experience, it's more authentic to how life is. Like we don't always know what's coming next. And so by leaving some of that discovery in my writing, I feel like there's kind of an intuitive flow that is tapped into there, where I'm letting the characters and me be kind of collaborative on this story. And there, like even in phase, there's been a couple of moments where I was going to write Lila or Val doing or saying a certain thing, and there was some pushback. Like that's not what I would
Really?
do. Oh
That's
yeah.
not what I would say.
And the scene just would not work. I like, no, this is what we're doing, and it was like not working. And I was like, okay, back it up, try something else, because obviously this is not feeling very authentic right now.
I find that absolutely fascinating. I've spent so much time buried in my own art, and it's like, and
Mm,
you rehearse, so you can forget it,
yep.
and then just be, and then just be
Hmm.
authentic, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds exactly like the same thing,
Hmm.
you know. That's
Yeah.
that's that's so cool. So let me ask you this, and I hear a little one in the background.
Yes, I have 3.
You have 3. How
Yes.
do you find that balance? Like, I was stunned when I read this and absolutely loved it, and then I follow you on Twitter or X, whatever we're supposed to call it now, and 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 I see you have Bloodstones is coming out in November, right?
Yes.
It's like,
Yep.
how in the world? How do you have the time? How did you pull that off? I mean, you're editing as you go along, so I mean,
Yeah.
you get it across the finish line in that way. But are you kind of like a lunch pail writer where you have certain hours every day that you clock in and that has to happen? Or
I am I admire so much the authors that have such a consistent process for their writing times. I think that that's incredibly useful, and I wish that my brain worked that way. Um, I write whenever I can. I have written at the lunch table while my kids are throwing stuff around me. I have written in my chair in the living room. I write at night when my entire family is sleeping. I am a partial insomniac, so I'm up late hours of the night anyways.
handy.
And it is kind of, when you're a writer, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily healthy, but it's handy for sure. Um, and I've often found that in that part of the night, I do write fairly emotionally intense stories typically. And
Mhm.
so when I'm slightly delirious, like 1 o'clock in the morning, it's amazing how that unlocks the emotional status of your story, which is
So
great.
when you're writing, are you acting? Are you living it? Is it moving through you at times? I mean, these characters almost like a possession type of thing.
I mean, kind of. It's a little tricky with phased because Val is very heavily um you know, as writers, we put little bits of ourselves in every character that we put on the page. Val is very close to myself at about age 16, 17.
Yeah.
And so for her, I mean, you could definitely argue that a little bit more, because she was the easiest to write, because I was essentially just, you know, writing myself in a lot of ways. And then Lila, and this goes into the sisterhood thing, Lila was based very heavily on my best friend Sarah, who is Sparrow Springs Art on Twitter. She's doing the cover. She did the cover for Phase, doing it for Bloodstones.
So that's where the sisterhood comes in.
Yes.
And when did you first
We were 13. So we're celebrating our 20th friendiversary next year. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
Because there was like, this is so authentic. Like
Yeah.
the sister relationship is so authentic. And I grew up with a sister. I thought for sure she's got to have siblings, but in a
adopted,
way you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, when you're an only child, I think it's a very natural. It's not like, it's kind of a void in your life that when you kind of start filling on your own, like you choose, oh, well, I never had siblings, so this is the person that I consider my sibling. And I have a couple of really close friends that have really filled that space for me. And they've been incredible pillars in my life. And Sarah is like my creative soulmate. Like we know each other better than anybody else on the planet at this point. And yeah, Val and Lila just kind of became little echoes of that.
Is she one of those trusted that you start at the beginning with story ideas, and she's on that list?
She knows everything about every story I write. She and my husband are the first two usually. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is so special. That's so special.
It really is.
Yeah, to have that. Absolutely. So when you started picking up that stack of fiction at the library, right? 9 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say were some of the influences that drew you to this genre, or that pushed you to like that? I want to do that.
I think it was kind of a mixture of mediums, actually, because I grew up watching a lot of movies with my parents. And I remember walking in on the cave troll scene in the Fellowship of the Ring at a friend's house when I was about 11, and I had nightmares for months. But I couldn't get it out of my head. Yeah, it was just this massive, epic thing. And I was just mind blown by it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, and ended up telling my parents, like, can we rent this because I want to see like the whole thing. Like, what is this?
Okay. Did you wait till you were older to tell your parents that?
I think I was about 11? 12 or 13.
Okay.
Yeah. 12 or 13.
A little bit of time had gone by.
Yeah. And I'd grown up with like the old BBC Narnia, and it was, you know, that kind of stuff. And I read, there was kind of a double, I think I fantasy mixed with really emotionally invested and charged stories is kind of where my emphasis lies. And I read White Fang by Jack London is definitely one of my early influences that I point to a lot. And just the amount of incredible emotional depth that he reached with a nonverbal character that was non-human just blew me away. And I read that pretty early on. I think I was 10 or 11 when I read that. Later on, I was introduced in early college years to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and that's remained a big influence for me. Lots of films. I'm trying to think. Well, Lord of the Rings obviously was a big one. I've still never read the books. I'm a horrible fantasy fan.
And you call yourself a fantasy booktuber. But you've seen all the movies.
Yes. And they were hugely influential. I mean, that was kind of my generation Star Wars, you know. Yeah. And it kind of connected with that little girl in the basement who was building these massive stories out of her toys and those kind of, I was like, wow, I could write that. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of so epic fantasy has always been my heart and soul. I just wasn't quite ready for it yet.
Working on it.
Yes.
It was always a work in progress.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So have you read the Narnia books?
Yes.
Or you just did the BBC? Okay.
No, I read them. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. They were big for me when I was young.
So good.
And I remember, I mean, the first thing, it's interesting how you say multimedia, because for me, I'll never forget the first time I saw the Hobbit cartoon. I think it was like the Ralph Bakshi Hobbit. It's like that was it for me. I was one of the main big things. Yeah. Let me get in a little bit deeper to actually phased, if I can.
Absolutely.
Some questions I absolutely were just gnawing at me as I read this. And I think these are all the things that I just connected and loved so much about this book, is the restraint I saw in you. And I think that comes from, this is obviously not your first book you've been writing since you were 14, but the restraint you found in exactly where you placed this story in time. Because if you really think, like, if you're thinking, I want it to be as sensational as I can, you could back it up some. And I want to stay vague so I don't give anything away, because anyone that hasn't read this should absolutely pick this up. But it could be more sensational, delicious, adventurous, pick an adjective if you scoot it back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But the restraint you had as an artist to focus on these sisters' relationship as they're going through these school years, this institution, makes it so importantly relatable and important to whoever would be reading it, because we've all had those experiences. And to me, that's part of the magic of literature, right? Is to relive those experiences, maybe from a little bit of a different perspective.
Right.
So was that true? That's just the way it always was for you? Or did you spend time cognizantly moving the needle on that timeline of just where I wanted to set it?
Well, I think I always knew that I wanted to tell it in a space that would give me access to, some of the more modern technologies that we have. I knew that I wanted it to be in a more urban setting, because I felt like it just lends itself to a werewolf book so well to begin with. And Underworld is actually one of my favorite franchises in film. I don't know, those kind of cult classics that was a big influence on me. And the vampires and the werewolves in that story were just so incredibly well done. And I always just liked that idea of, the urban setting and getting to play with that, but also recognizing that the world was secondary. The world had to provide the right backdrop for the characters I was designing, because at the end of the day, there is world building in Phased, obviously, but that's not the focus. It's, what provides the best backdrop for the specific type of kind of trauma and survivorhood that I delve into with Val and Lila. And that it just kind of all fell into place. And it's modern, but you can't really, I tried not to make it placed exactly in a specific era, so you couldn't say, oh, this is like 2005 or whatever,
Right. It's definitely not a period piece, but I just love where it slots right into, because I'm trying to think how not to give too much away, but we
can do a spoiler section if you want.
there's some glimmers, right, given through some flashbacks.
Yes.
And it's like of that trauma that you're talking about or alluding to. And it's like, you could have started the book back then, and it would have been truly gut-wrenching to live through that with Val and Lila, right?
Yep.
But it was so much more, to me, meaningful to be in this period of time when they're trying to heal.
Yep.
Like, sure, it would be gut-wrenching and sensational, but the healing journey that their relationship is bolstering in this time. And, and it's interesting that you say in a city as a backdrop, because to me that it was so contextual about that moment that we have as kids. We don't feel like we fit in.
Yep.
We don't feel like we have a place. We're searching for that, with not only with friends and family and people, but just in our own minds, where we're going to be, what we're going to do, where we slot in. Right.
Yep.
And for someone whose inner animal literally is trying to fit into more of a societal norm.
Right.
Thematically is so powerful for that.
Yeah.
So again, your restraint to slot all that in and not go for,
Yeah. I have a lot of
And I apologize. I don't know if there's a question there.
No, I think it speaks a little bit to, you know, when you include traumatic events in any story, and you know, those of us that are fantasy fans are very familiar with a lot of them, because they're in almost every book we read at this point. I think restraint is important. I think restraint is, and intentionality especially, is very important, because it is easy to turn to the shock value and say, oh, but I want to show you this, and just make, but to me, that's the cheaper emotional investment. If you really want to have that depth with these characters, and when I interviewed Steve Erickson on my channel earlier this year, it really stuck with me. He made the comment, I asked him how he writes trauma and how he, like, you know, what his kind of process for that, or what are the important things to remember in that. And he said, stay with your characters. It's not about this one event. It's about everything that they have to deal with because of that, and stay with those characters, because that's where you as the reader and the author are taking that kind of responsibility for what's on the page. And for Val and Lila, I started writing the book when I had just begun my own trauma therapy journey. And so the theme of healing was huge for me to be able to express and explore in the pages, and really show, these characters are not wholly defined by what has happened to them.
They're far stronger than that.
Exactly. And what happens after that, you know, because people always want the big shock value and that horrible thing that happened, but then what? You know, how do you, when you have this prolonged period of when you have to stay in that place that was so traumatizing, and how do you deal with that and suppress all of the, I mean, it's a lot to work through.
And in this case, which I thought was so beautiful, how do you make an internal emotional sacrifice to help heal your sister or the other person that went through with you, you know?
Right. And they have such different coping mechanisms, which was also important to the show, because you can go through the same trauma, and Val and Lila have very different coping mechanisms.
Worlds apart.
Yep.
But both willing to sacrifice one for the other when it 100%. Comes down to it, which was, you know, so beautiful. And the amazing thing, I think I've heard you describe this as like a YA type of situation. I mean, and here's what I'm going to say about that. Right. Like, I mean, it does have young characters in it, and it does deal with some things that would be important to people at that point in their lives, because the characters they're reading are young as well. But there's never a moment that I'm trying to think of the right word. I belittle isn't quite it, but play down or make it less important. And I've been around the block far longer than you, but I can still vividly remember those moments. I vividly remember the first moment I realized I was in love. I vividly remember a trauma I went through at that age when my family broke up. Like, those things make me even now.
Exactly. Yep.
And for us to say it's not, oh, buck up, kid, pull your boots up, you'll get past that, you'll get over that. Never once do you take that tone with these characters. So what I find so amazing about it is any young person reading this is validated and has a character journey to aspire to because of the sacrifice these two sisters are willing to go through, one for the other. And not only just them, but the found families that they're building around them, right? Right. Yeah. So, I mean, to talk to me about some of those themes, was that all on your mind, or is that just me bringing, you know, art's subjective, I bring me to the art. Is that just me, or did you have all that going on while you were putting this together?
The themes were really important to me, and I wanted PHASED to be the type of story that, you know, regardless of what someone who's reading it has experienced in life, there's, I hope, something within the pages that pretty much everyone's going to be able to relate to, if nothing less than the feeling like the outsider and feeling like you've been pushed out and that people look at you differently and all of that. When it came to the themes of survivorhood was a really important one for me, because I think there's a big difference between being a victim and being a survivor. You're a victim of an event, but then immediately you become a survivor, or can become a survivor. And it's, it was important to me with Val and Lila to address the theme of, when life has given you so many heavy things to carry, how do you find it within yourself to do the right thing anyways, and to stick up for other people when you've had a lifetime learning how to distrust everyone else? And then that kind of self-sacrifice is a big theme that draws me in books that I read and films that I watch. And that's a theme that I rely on very heavily in my own writing.
Oh, it shows. It sure did in this. It sure did in this.
And I think I want to see more of that in the world, more of the, standing up for each other and doing the right thing, even when it's hard, and learning how to humanize people you don't agree with. And like, there's so many things in there that I think were really important to me. And especially going through the personal life journey I was on when I was writing the book, it started out as I wanted to write a book about werewolves. And I had some heavy trauma diagnoses about a month after I started writing it. And just the book became a completely different story.
Do you think the timing of that dovetailed off of one another? Like when you start to, and here, let me preface that a little bit. I love the genre of horror, and some people think it's ghetto. It's we put it on its shelf in the back of the store because But I was classically trained, and drama is life lived at a heightened reality. There's no way to heighten that reality than to bring in the most basic fight or flight human instincts that horror deals with, right?
Right.
So, I mean, for you to be getting in that neighborhood, do you think that made you to start look at your own introspectively, the things you've been through in your own past in a different way? Yeah, for
sure. I mean, it begs the question, what are the real monsters we face in life? Excuse my cat.
Not at all.
It's, and I think that horror element really pushes, it pushes it to an extreme where you're kind
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, you have to make, okay, I'm not like, there's no real, in one sense, there's more of a barrier because you're safely exploring these themes through a fantasy setting, which is important. And, werewolfism in PHASED is very much, if you wanted to take it that way, kind of a metaphor for PTSD. And I mean, you could insert a lot of different things in there.
Again, whoever personally you are bringing to the art, which I thought was brilliant.
Right. There's different ways to interpret that depending on what you are bringing in. Yeah. Yeah.
I love this about it as well, right? Like when we do werewolves, and there's a long history in, let me wrangle my cord. There's a long history in this type of literature and movies, right?
Yep.
Of our inner selves, our inner animal, our id, our soup, however you want to break that up. So there's a long history of that in cinema. And in what made you decide I'm going to go with the more when they phase or when they shift? I'm going to go with they're animalistic, but there is more of a human aspect to them as opposed to they're a huge hulking creature.
Right. I think because I wanted to keep the humanity. I think that was really important to me because if from my own perspective, I have a diagnosis of CPTSD. And one of the things that was important to me is when you have those moments when you lose control and you feel like you are completely at the mercy of your brain and your circumstances and the past, it's hard to hold on to your own humanity. And it's hard to, remind yourself of your humanity and give yourself grace in those moments. And that I mean, when you just turn them into a big wolf, they become something else entirely.
Right. And the struggle goes away.
Exactly.
Our internal struggle goes away, right?
Exactly.
Like, I just love going back to that Lon Chaney moment, where I can still see the man fighting his inner turmoil.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that decision.
Well, and this is, I mean, on a lighter note, at the beginning of Phased, I grew up in the Twilight era of high school, and I had a lot of anybody who enjoys Twilight, again, I love that for you.
Yeah.
And I've
heard you talk about this before.
Yeah. I'm not here to bash anybody's reading taste, but for me personally, I was very disappointed with, I felt like the fact that the werewolves and the vampires, like, it didn't really have any depth to it. There was really nothing. And maybe that's not the point. That's fine.
Yeah.
But for me, I was like, I want to, what would I do with werewolves? And that was kind of how it started. And then it just, became its own thing.
I love it. And I love Underworld too. I'm a huge Bill Nighy fan. I mean,
yes.
Huge,
Victor.
Yes. Come on now. Bill Nighy,
he's amazing.
He is amazing. So, and those are big hulking creatures. And, it tells for that story, it works great because it's a war.
Yeah.
But this, for young people struggling to find their place and struggling with what they've gone through in the past and bringing that into, as you said, grace and peace on their inside.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Thank you.
Absolutely perfect. And I really want to give you again kudos for giving this and it sounds weird to say a werewolf book, but I'm sure you'll take this the right way as a mom of 3. What a great blueprint for any young person to read. And I just think there's so many themes and messages in here that so many of our young people would benefit from.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Really, really important. Let's move on. And I'm interested in this now because you started with poetry.
Yes. I
found the language in this so evocative, so provocative and evocative. And now that I know you started as a poet, it all makes sense to me. I absolutely want to talk about, and now that I know that you rewrite as you go, you're going back in chapters and rewriting. And I know, I think I understand the tinkering. There's just so much power of language that you have here, Tori, in word choice and sentence structure. Just things that struck me so much, like when the father took, I believe it was Val's hand, and you used the word caged her hand in his, and that was so evocative to me of families and what a family means and what that means in. It was just huge for me, that one moment. Towards the end of the book, you go on about golden leaves on the forest floor like a palace carpet. And it's like, I had to stop and go back and read that a couple times. I have to tell you, on my journey so far into self-pub, I find the stories are imaginative and wonderful, and they push some boundaries maybe that you don't see on shelves everywhere, even though I think some of them should be on shelves everywhere. I don't always see that type of power of language or that craft of word usage labored over.
Thank you.
And that must be paramount important to you when you're writing. Yes, no, is it me?
Yeah, no, it is. And I think, again, I have to credit a lot of the influences and predecessors that I've had with that, because words are so powerful.
Yes.
And, to me, that goes back to talking about how you really knowing the character you're writing from, because the way that Val or Lila is going to describe a man-made structure is going to be different than the way that they describe nature. And they're going to view nature with this kind of nostalgic, romanticized, longing almost. And this idea of, well, yeah, I want to be back out in that palace carpet of forest instead of this like cage. And there's a lot of caged sort of language in the book intentionally, because
it's a true theme. And for me, when the father caged her hand, to me, that's the responsibility of family, not a cage it's not a cage to capture. It's a cage to encompass, encase, and protect.
Right.
And
But
just
Val may still see it as a cage.
at that
So you
stage,
can like put
but
multiple.
then where she's at now, looking back, I think
Right.
she has the fulfillment of a character arc where she does see it with what her father intended, right?
Yeah.
And it to me, it just speaks about the adult ability that these younger characters are written on a true arc, that they're able to look back on that arc at a younger self and have an epiphany like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not always around
Right.
in a book, you know, so short or in this genre. And I really wanted to give you full kudos on that. It
Thank
really
you.
struck me and really touched me in a lot of ways, especially after being a father.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, as parents, there's a line in Anna Karenina that I have not read it myself, but I'd heard that there's that line in there about how this character holds his newborn daughter for the first time. And there's a line of, and suddenly he knew all the ways the world could hurt him.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite lines I've ever heard in literature, and makes me want to read the book just because of that line.
It's well worth a read.
It's definitely a classic on my list because
I mean the Russians for me in my art form, the Russians are kind of paramount. So
sure,
you know, with Stanislavski and everything else. So I've done kind of a deep dive there. But yeah, you should spend some time with that book. But I saw so much in this, and the other thing I saw in this that I found very provocative is your power over imagery. And I think I understand you have such, like me, when you start thinking about your influences, it crosses media and mediums.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised whatsoever that your ability of this very provocative imagery. And I don't want to give too much away, but there are moments that in my mind, I'm bringing up images of Kent State. I'm bringing up images of young immigrants held on the border. You know, there's so many things about us as adults, our misuse of authority in attempting to protect or instill a greater good as far as our young people go. Were you aware that kind of imagery was there when you were working on this? Was that something you were cognizant of, or is that just a reader bringing himself to it?
I mean, there's definitely, you know, just like all of the readers are going to kind of project things that are really important and relevant immediately to them into the story. I think the author does the same thing. And that's not always the same thing, but I think the misuse of authority is definitely something that I was intentionally playing with in the story. And I'm very careful when I write not to, I don't intend anything I write to be a stand-in for any type of real world history. That's something that I personally stay away from as much as I can, but that doesn't mean that it's not a reflection of certain things that have happened, you know? And you kind of have this freedom to explore and process things. You know, every book is a little therapist in between two covers in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And it should teach you something about yourself, every book that you read.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there were definitely some things that I think I was going through at the time that were, you know, certainly with my background, I know what it's like to be misused by authority figures, and that definitely played in. And for the next person, you know, like you're coming in with your, you know, this is what you're seeing in that imagery, and that's such a beautiful timeless gift of literature, I think, is to be able to reach out and speak to each individual person.
Yeah, art in general, right?
100%.
Entirely subjective. Until I bring my soul to it, it's not what it is to me.
Yeah.
I love that you said reflective, because to me, that's what this genre is so amazingly capable of doing, is holding up that social mirror.
Yes.
Because it removes us. It has just enough dissonance to really remove us to where we're just free enough to not think that it's there, and it seeps in. And
Right.
I just thought it was just really deftly done.
Thank you.
I truly, truly enjoyed that aspect of it. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and I know this has to be enormously important to you because on BookTube, when you talk to friends, you call it the Motley Crew, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Did you notice that?
I did notice that. So the theme of found family
Yeah.
and it's wrapped up here in First Love too, which I thought was done so beautifully. Like again, to me, I keep going back to this. I will never forget, and it's like for me, it was like the phone hanging in the kitchen with the really long cord, and I could
Yep.
go all the way to the next room. Like
Yep.
all these moments that made me who I am, and it's just you captured so much of that so well, and I've heard you talk to other people about this, and they ended up with the right people.
Right.
You know, like
Yes.
it wasn't some stupid triangle, and it wasn't like, what are you even thinking? I guess you're young and stupid. And that's why it doesn't speak down to any audience.
You're
You're
right.
not, they're not young and stupid. They happen to be the age they are, and they're feeling things for the first time. And that makes it, if anything, it makes it more important.
Well, I think it was so important to me to, going back to originally where I was kind of tired of the supernatural toxic romances that I was seeing as the kind of main staple of that subgenre. And it was important to me to subvert that and be like, well, yeah, but what if we didn't do that? What if we, gave these characters not like any type of relationship, whether it's friendship, romantic interest or anything that's
Right.
actually worth chasing,
Right.
because, and
And worth
especially,
fighting for. Because
yeah. And
again, the imagery I'm talking about Kent State, like things go down at a school. I'm not going to say any more than that, but it's
yep.
so worth fighting for.
Right. Yeah. And it's, when Val and Lila, they're coming out of a very toxic situation and they're trying to somehow make sense of the world around them and survive everything that they're going through. What contrasts that? And and it's very early on in the story that we start seeing that struggle in them of, do I trust this person? How do I know? Like, and like still kind of keeping some safety barriers there and not, kind of.
Yeah. They're absolutely hesitant of making
Yeah.
friends, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're an island of two when they get there.
Right.
And what I love about the friends they make and the family they surround themselves with, they're all worthy. Like
Right.
there's none of them that's like, what's that person's deal? Like they're all worthy, they're all worth fighting for, they're all willing to fight for. And it's like it's a lot of what I remembered my experience being, when you're all together in school like that,
Yep.
and you all get each other, because
Yep.
you're never going to be in this state of life again with these people again.
Yep.
And you just captured that so well. And to hear that you were homeschooled just completely floors me.
I have always been, like I mentioned before, I'm an empath. So whenever
You
I
gotta be.
whenever I listen to somebody's story, I really try to, I don't know what the right word is. I really kind of soak it in and
You
absorb
live
a
it.
little
You have
bit.
to live
Yeah.
it.
In
You
my
have to
head,
live
I
it.
live it. I have
Yeah.
spent so much of my life imagining myself in other people's lives and situations and experiences that, and I was surrounded by people who had lived these experiences, and there's a little bit of their stories within that. Sarah, my best friend, who was the inspiration for Lila, she was public schooled. So, being so closely knit with her, I was kind of had a window into
Mhm.
that kind of a growing up experience. Um, and I spent a lot of time outside when I was young, and so the love for nature and the being out in the forest and running around in the leaves, and I was the kid that was, fighting the trees with my sword stick and everything else.
Are you letting I mean, so many kids don't do that anymore.
My kids do.
I was gonna say,
Absolutely,
push
yes.
all 3 of them out there because
Yeah.
that's huge, right?
Huge,
Yeah,
absolutely. My kids are already, all three of them have started their own stories. They each have a little binder. They're working on books and they story tell all day, all the time, and
that's
it's
special.
awesome. Yeah,
Like when
it's
you did
awesome.
this at 14, and I should have asked you back then, yeah, and your mom push to public? Has
Mhm.
your parents or your mom, have you had support all the way through, like all the way up to now? And
They are so supportive of my creativity, and it's really cool to me that back at 14 that my mom, for her, one of the things about homeschooling that was really important that I've tried to bring into my experience now teaching my kids is one of the main goals for a lot of homeschooling parents is to really discover what gifts your children have and the
Mhm,
things that are just in them, and
mhm.
letting that come out and flourish and letting them, you know, focus on those things and really grow up into the adult that's going to be able to utilize the gifts that they've been given. And so for her, seeing, I was writing when I was supposed to be doing my math. I was constantly, she said, whatever your kids do that drive you bonkers is probably the thing that they're going to be the best at.
That's what they're supposed to do. I
Right.
mean,
Because
what you lose time
from
at
it,
is what you're.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for her to recognize that in me and work so hard to foster it, I think was a huge foundation for where I'm at now.
Oh, that's great. That
Yeah.
is so amazing to hear. Like
Yeah.
in public school, it was a different thing. You have to find your people, you know?
Yep.
Like whatever, is it band? Is it theater? Is it athletics? Is it,
Yep.
and what I see now, it's like now that there are so many avenues or opportunities are going away,
Right.
and young people don't have as many options to find themselves in their group, and
Yeah.
it's just it's
It's
heartbreaking.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there's still, I mean, as a homeschooler, especially as an only child, finding my people was also a bit of a challenge.
Well, yeah.
um, you know, and
That's why you had to create them with blocks. Now that
exactly. Well, and that's why, books became such a huge staple in my life. Those I was as it sounds a little, well, I'm in the right community to say this, but I was as attached to a lot of fictional characters as I was to real people for a while because
absolutely.
those books taught me how to be a human in
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
And
So,
now you have written one that does the same thing, Tori.
thank you.
This is a wonderful blueprint
Thank you.
of how to be human while struggling with trauma.
Thank you.
And you should, I hope you are immensely proud of it. It meant a great deal to me.
Thank you so much. I am very proud of it, and I hope that it's probably one of the most personal projects that I've ever done and probably ever will do. But I just hope that whoever is reading it, like you, gets something that really matters to them out of it, whatever that may be, and that the
Well,
characters really speak to them.
you can check that box for me. So mission accomplished. Before we sign off now, I gotta do this. I gotta get in my time machine and move into November because I'm excited for Bloodstone, right?
I'm so excited.
So now that I've heard that you're down there building universes with blocks, how long has this germ of an idea been in your noggin?
So the world that Bloodstones takes place in has been around for over 11 years now. The first beginnings of the world started back when I was in college, and I actually had written the first draft of the series, the first book in the series that happens after the one I'm writing now
Mm,
back then. And I was very new to epic fantasy as a reader, and I didn't have the right steps in place yet. Fast
okay.
forward 10 years, I wrote
Okay.
Phased. I had babies. I was a exhausted mother for years.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
then I started picking up fiction again, and Phased was such an important stepping stone for me to get back into fiction and really discover my voice again, and especially going from young child author to adult Tori, and how does, is what's the same, what's different, and really finding that confidence that I'm not just a young commodity, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
and that's going to continue now into my adult years. And Bloodstones has been around. I was going to pick up that original series again, and I realized that there was a prequel to it that I needed to tell first, as you
And
do.
that what a great epiphany for you. I love where you place this in time, this book. So I'm so fascinated now by
Bloodstones is
when you go
more
back now, it's like, oh,
ancient
this isn't
tribal
it. It
era
starts
fantasy.
here. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Oh,
This
okay.
is really my Bloodstones is my love letter to all of the all of my favorite stories and all of my favorite characters. It is a love letter to the genre of epic fantasy, and also mixing that with my love of exploring heavy topics through very deep character connections. So all of those things kind of crash together, and Bloodstones is I'm just so excited for it to come out. I can't wait.
Well, I'm sure you're more excited than me, but I'm pretty excited.
I'm so glad you're excited.
I'm telling you, after reading this, I cannot. It's a day one. It's a day one buy for me.
Thank you.
I am so excited to see you move into an epic world with all the tools that I see that you have in your toolbox already.
Thank you.
Moving into like a broader spectrum, and this world is very. I was really taken by this. Are you going to come back to this? Because again, no spoilers, but the way this ends,
you can blame Sarah for that one. So Phased was originally a standalone, actually. And then Sarah and I were talking about it, and I'd had a couple ideas for if I ever did a sequel, but I wasn't very serious about it. And Sarah was like, well, if you wrote, this kind of thing at the ending, you could maybe explore it. So I was like, okay. So I threw the epilogue in there, and now I'm like, oh, well, now I do have to write a sequel, don't I?
What an adventure you've set up.
I'm excited. So True Blood is book 2, and that is...
So there is a book 2.
There is a book 2, yes. And it is a bit of a time jump, which I'm very excited about, because in book 2, a lot of the themes that we're going back to is people have this idea that healing is a linear process. And it's not. It's messy, and it's hard, and it takes years and years and years of work. And I think that's a lifetime. Exactly. And I want to, what happens when some new factors are introduced to the lives of our characters, and they have certain opportunities that they didn't have in book 1, and how does that change their healing process, and what do their coping mechanisms look like now that they're in a different, setting and all of that. So
that's awesome. I know your favorite series, one of my favorite series, Red Rising. It starts, but then we get to watch that character, and I know you haven't gone past the first trilogy.
I haven't. I'm such a chicken.
But I'm telling you, you get to go into,
I can't wait.
After I read this Lightbringer, it's like, this is Macbeth at the end of 5 acts, after he's seen what war is, after he's seen the toll and the pay that comes due, and we get to start with them, and then we end up with them. So it sounds like you've got the same kind of thing in mind, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, Tori, thank you so much. I hope it was not too painful. I hope I didn't.
Oh gosh, this was fun.
I did not riddle you with questions or.
If you find an author who doesn't like somebody getting excited and talking about the themes of their book, I'd be concerned about them.
Well, there's some that I wouldn't be as excited about, but this really struck me, and it really took me back. And I really, really appreciate your work, and I can't wait to get a hold of more of it. So as soon as Bloodstone comes out, I will be picking it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your channel.
What a dream come true. I got on this format because I wanted to talk to artistic, exciting people like you. And for you to give me this time, it has been a great deal to me. And please thank your family for letting you share this time with me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tori.
Thanks, John.